chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. And I'm going to read a few verses. The character that we're studying together tonight is Rehoboam. And he is the son of Solomon, so he would be David's grandson. And he comes from a line of kings. He is in the Davidic line. He has God's blessing as he begins his life and reign and career. And then we find out that things don't go like we hope they do. So I'm going to read 1 Kings chapter 12, and I'm going to read up through about verse 15 to set the stage for our study on Rehoboam tonight. Then Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, he was living in Egypt, for he was yet in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. Then they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father, and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Then he said to them, Depart for 3 days, and then return to me. So the people departed. King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, How do you counsel me to answer this people? Then they spoke to him, saying, If you will be a servant to this people today, and will serve them and grant them their petition, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the elders which they had given him, and consulted with the young men who grew up with him and served him. So he said to them, What counsel do you give that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Lighten the yoke which your father put on us? The young men who grew up with him spoke to him, saying, Thus you shall say to this people who spoke to you, saying, Your father made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us. But you shall speak to them, My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Then Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the 3rd day, as the king had directed, saying, Return to me on the 3rd day. The king answered the people harshly, for he forsook the advice of the elders which they had given him. And he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of events from the Lord, that he might establish his word, which the Lord spoke through Abijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Well, challenging, and this is not that long after. This is only 40 years after David has died. It's not that long a period of time, but what's about to happen is the kingdom of Israel is about to split in two, and this is tragic because it will never be reunited for the rest of its existence. Several hundred years, the northern kingdom of Israel is going to be one entity. The southern kingdom of Judah is going to be a separate kingdom. And the two halves will never be reunited. In fact, that's one of the prophecies of the millennium. The coming reign of Jesus Christ is that the north and the south will be one kingdom. And this is tragic. This is God's people whom he loves, and here they are split. So this period of time, I'm reading the opening paragraph on the study sheet, Rehoboam, Bible Character Study number 23. This period of time is only 40 years after the death of David, yet there are dramatic and terrible changes in the land. Instead of a unified godly kingdom, there are now two warring countries, each with serious problems. The background for the issues that Rehoboam and his enemy Jeroboam face started in the life and rule of Solomon, Rehoboam's father. Number one, what key issues resulted in catastrophe and heartache in a single generation? King Solomon loved, what is it? Many foreign women. From the nations God had commanded Israel not to associate with. He had how many wives? 700. Yes, you read that right. 700 wives and 300 concubines. Solomon turned his heart away after other gods Specifically, Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. Anybody know who the Sidonians are? So Tyre and Sidon, Tyre, and Sidon, Sidon, are Phoenician cities on the coast of Lebanon. Actually, if you go up to Beirut, if you look on a map, these towns some of them are still called by the same names, thousands of years later. So Phoenician gods. Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. He even built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch, the abomination of the Ammonites. Some of these gods, these idols, are so horrific. The one that is named Moloch especially, they're all horrible. They're all wicked. Depravity at levels we can only, we really can't even talk about it. Moloch was a god that the Ammonites would sacrifice babies to. They actually, it was, even to talk about it, just stomach churning. It was a bronze statue, and it was hollow inside, and they would light a fire inside the statue, and then they would toss their infants on the arms. What kind of a sick thing is that? And this is a god that they worship. This is just repulsive. And who is it that's building these? Solomon, David's son. David loved God with all of his heart. He wasn't perfect. He sinned. He always came back to the Lord. He always repented. What else do we know about Solomon? How smart, how wise was he? Wise man. But even being wise, even being filthy rich, and he was filthy rich, even being king, even being a major power politically in the Middle East, is not enough to cause him to be, at the end of his life, he was not a good man. He started out as a great man. He started out great. And Solomon, because he made wrong choices about his allegiance, he chose to love these women in violation of God's standards. And because of that, he's going downhill. But here's the even sadder than that. It's not just him. He is setting the platform for his son and the entire kingdom to go downhill too. So Rehoboam grew up in a palace that had 1,000 women. And nearby were all these temples and shrines to all these foreign gods. Instead of being led by his dad to go to the temple of Jehovah and worship the God of Israel in spirit and truth, Rehoboam grows up around this idolatry. I'm not suggesting we blame Solomon for everything, because Rehoboam makes his own choices. But the background of this is so sad, so tragic. This is God's people. This is the people that God sent Moses to Egypt and said, redeem them, bring them out. They're my people. This is the people that God took care of for 40 years in the wilderness. This is the people that God rescued time and again in the book of Judges. And now, look at this. What a mess. So, I'm still in that opening paragraph. Question number 2, what punishment did God pronounce on Solomon and his descendants? He would do what? Tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon's son and give 10 tribes. 10 tribes. So the northern kingdom consists of 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom is really 2. What 2 are they? Judah and Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin are the 2 tribes that remained loyal to David's line. They stayed true to the Davidic covenant. By the way, that plays a role for the whole rest of the Bible. You might remember that great passage in Philippians chapter 2 where Paul is talking about things that are valuable according to the flesh. He says, if any man has a reason to boast, I have a reason to boast. He says, I'm a Jew. I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews. I was brought up according to the Pharisee sect, the traditional conservative. And furthermore, he says, I am of the tribe of Benjamin. Paul was a Benjamite. What he's saying is, I come from the lineage, I come from the background of one of the two tribes that remained loyal to David's line. And that's important, that's significant. Question number 3, why did God say he was going to do this? Because they have forsaken me and have worshipped Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth is a female prostitute, a consort goddess of the god Baal or Baal, a Canaanite god. And very pagan, very obscene images made of her. Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Milcom, and they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and observing my statutes and my ordinances. So this is why God says, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of the hands of Solomon, and specifically Solomon's son. So now, question 4, we're picking up where we just read a moment ago in 1 Kings chapter 12. Where did all Israel assemble? Shechem. That's a place that the tabernacle was there for a while. In the book of Judges, various assemblies and convocations were held there. So it's an important public area. And why did they go to Shechem? To make Rehoboam king. So this is going to be the official ceremony. It would probably involve anointing, pouring oil on his head, and then putting a crown on him. And then everybody says, you know, if it were England, hail, long live the king, that kind of thing. And they would have something like that in Israel. Maybe not quite those words, but something along those lines. Number 6, who did the people summon from Egypt, apparently as a spokesman? Jeroboam, and he's identified as son of Nebat. Now, we didn't read tonight the portion that deals with him. He had been a thorn in the side of Solomon. He had been kind of a rebel. He didn't like Solomon, and he was kind of a populist. He said, you're being hard on the people. And he was trying to instigate a rebellion during Solomon's time. Solomon tried to kill him. He fled, and he went to Egypt and hid out. He was in exile in Egypt. But now Solomon has died. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, is about to be made king. Somebody sends a messenger down to Egypt and finds Jeroboam and says, we could use you. Why don't you come on up? And he comes up, and apparently he is now kind of the spokesman for the people. And maybe he has pure motives at this point. Maybe he just says, you know, the Jewish people have been suffering. Solomon used Jews for lots and lots of forced labor. All of his building projects, the temple, his own palace, fortresses and walls and cisterns and roads, and Solomon was a builder. And he did hire some foreigners from Lebanon to work for him, but he also implemented a rotation system of forced labor. Every tribe had to supply several thousand men to come and cut stone and hew timber and haul logs and work in the... And Solomon had these big, grandiose plans, but it did cost something. And the people are worn out. They're tired. So they have asked Jeroboam, come back from Egypt, represent our interests to the king. So maybe Jeroboam has, you know, good motives. In a chapter or two, we're going to discover, at least by that point, it's not so good. But right now, maybe he's just interested in trying to help the people. So the people I just answered for you in number 6. And number 7 says, what were Jeroboam's words to Rehoboam? Your father made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. It'd be like the American colonists saying to the King of England, could you do something about the taxes? Could you reduce things a little bit? It's kind of tough over here. If you could make it easier so we could just survive and quit taking everything we produce, we're your loyal subjects. We'll serve you. And the answer comes back, forget you. We want more taxes. Well, that's kind of what's going on here. So the request is, your dad, Rehoboam, Solomon, was rugged on us. We worked and we worked and we worked. If you could lighten up, hey, we're your loyal guys. We're with you all the way. That's what they're saying. Number 8, does this request seem reasonable to you? Absolutely, and especially if you go back and read the records of the kind of forced labor that Solomon was implementing on his own people. We're talking tens of thousands, we're talking sometimes hundreds of thousands of men for sometimes like a month at a time or a couple months at a time. They leave their families and they go haul rock for Solomon and his projects. And see, he's got these big designs, he's got big plans, but somebody's got to move the rock. Somebody's got to cut the trees and haul them. And so they've been doing that for a while now. It's been a long time. They're just asking, could you ease up a little? Could we have a little vacation? We need a break. Number 9, from what 2 groups of advisors did Rehoboam get counsel? The elders and the young men. So the elders were older guys. They were the ones that had served Solomon. They had been around for a while. They had seen the kingdom. They had seen how Solomon operated. They had seen both Solomon's greatness and his mistakes. And they had some experience and they had some wisdom. And as they're watching what's going on, their advice, that's question number 10, what did the first group say? Paraphrased. If you serve the people of Israel, speak kindly to them, and grant the request, they will be loyal to you your whole life. So the older guys are saying, now is the time to ease up. Your dad really was very hard on them. And if you ease up, you're showing you care. You're showing you're not just there to extract the last ounce of blood out of their veins. You care about them. You love them. You want them to have a life. And so ease up. Their request is entirely reasonable. You don't have to go in there showing you're the big boss. Just ease up a little. That's their advice. And then, of course, we know what happens. What did the second group say? Question number 11. Tell them, quit slacking and get back to work, or I'll whip or discipline or punish you more than my father did. And the language is pretty brutal, isn't it? My father laid a heavy yoke on you. Mine's even heavier. And my father disciplined you with whips. The implication being like taskmasters. He says, I'm going to use scorpions. How does that show love? Where's the gentleness in that? Where's the concern for people? So you can see Rehoboam is trying to project, I'm a tough guy. You don't boss me around. I'm the king. You don't tell me things. You don't suggest things. I tell you what to do. Well, so here's what's going to happen. Number 12, what advice did he follow? The advice of the young men, the guys his own age, the guys he grew up with. And you even have to wonder, with the wealth and the power that Solomon had in his palace, I wonder if Rehoboam ever went out and saw actual real people at work. It might be a tiny bit like some of the things that are happening in our own country. The elites, the people who are very wealthy, they're Harvard trained or they're from an Ivy League school, and they live in the enclaves behind walled gates and so on, and they have money, and they don't need any personal protection, and they don't really know what it's like to try to live in downtown Chicago, where shots are fired every single night, or out in the heartland, where if you're going to make a living, you got to get out when it's 20 below zero and run your machinery. They don't know anything about that. And so I wonder even if Rehoboam had led a very pampered childhood, and he didn't know what it was actually like to do manual labor. And now he's going to tell the people out there, go back to work. Well, so number 13, while Rehoboam is responsible for his own foolishness and stubbornness, who was directing events behind the scenes out of verse 15? The Lord. The Lord. And God is always in charge, even when things are running downhill. God is still on the throne. He's directing things. And we can take reassurance from that in our own case as we look at our culture around us, kind of running downhill. This is, without any question, part of God's plan. And it's highly likely that things are going to get worse before they get better. But God is still on the throne, and he is still ruling. Number 14, the author of Kings summarizes these God-ordained events by noting that Israel has been in what? Rebellion against the house of David to the day that he wrote this book. Number 15, King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel did what? Stoned him to death. You can only picture in your head. Rehoboam is sitting on some gold-gilded throne at Shechem, and he's just ordered Adoram, go get him back to work. And Adoram, maybe he swallows hard, but he says, yes, Your Majesty, I'll see to it. And he leaves, and 15 minutes later you can hear shouting and the noise of like a riot, and all of a sudden somebody runs in and says, Your Majesty, they killed him. They took stones and they killed Adoram. And Rehoboam, his eyes open up and he realizes, what did I just do? Not just the death of one man who was innocent, but what did I just do to the kingdom? And I wonder if he realized it. And then his next thought is, we got to get out of here. And maybe for the first time in his life, he ran. He ran to his chariot, and he got in and said, Jerusalem, now, get out of here, because he was afraid for his life. And so, I just answered number 16 for you. You're welcome. Number 17, what did the northern tribes do with Jeroboam? They made him king. He's now the king. And of course, once he has this sweet new job, he's going to be very loath to give it up. He's not going to be happy about any other option once he's got this new contract. But we're talking about Rehoboam. Number 18, what did Rehoboam plan on and take steps to do? To fight against Jeroboam and restore his whole kingdom. So he got back to his security arrangements in Jerusalem, and he called the commanders of his army and said, how many troops can we field right now? And I forget what the numbers were. There is a record of it I saw, 180,000. In verse 21 of chapter 12, 180,000 chosen men of Judah and Benjamin. That's a fairly sizable army. And he is all set to lead the troops into battle against whom? Jews. This is a civil war. This is, this is the north and the south. And Rehoboam is about to lead 180,000. The word chosen would suggest they're not just regular troops. These are good fighters. These are strong fighters. And he's about to lead them, And something happened to stop his plans. Question number 19. God sent Shemaiah to tell Judah, you shall not go up to fight Israel, or your relatives, your own kin. They're your relatives. You're not to do this. And to Rehoboam's credit, he did obey. He said, okay, everybody stand down. And so he did do what God told him to do, and he sent all the troops back. So, and I answered number 20 for you. You're welcome. They listened to the word of the Lord. Number 21. So here's some more background information and things that are going on. Who was Rehoboam's mother? Naamah, or Naamah the Ammonitess. So she's an Ammonite. Who are the Ammonites again? One of those tribes that Israel was not supposed to marry. In fact, that's the nation that had that really wicked god I was telling you about. That's that one. And Rehoboam's mom was a woman from Ammon that Solomon had married. Okay. Number 22, what is significant about her origin? Compare this with 11, 1-2. Well, she's an Ammonite, one of the nations God had told Israel not to associate with, or to intermarry with. Number 23, what phrases capture your attention in 14:21? What did you come up with? Yep. So his mother's name was Naamah the Ammonitess, and in the middle of that verse, speaking about Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chosen from all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. So interesting that Jerusalem is singled out for that mention. And what do you think it means that it says the Lord had chosen to have his name dwell there? What is in Jerusalem at the time of Rehoboam? A big building. The temple. The temple. Solomon built a temple. That's where the Jews are supposed to go. Every man who's a Jew is required by law to go 3 times a year to Jerusalem to participate in the sacrificial festivals. And so it's the heart of Israel. And God chose to have his name associated with that city. And you can, all through the Psalms, all through the Bible, you can find lots and lots of mentions of the city of Jerusalem. Even in Jesus' day, do you remember one time he was coming over the brow of the hill, the Mount of Olives from Bethany? He got to the top of the hill, and he looked over, and he saw Jerusalem spread out below him. Do you remember what he said? Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered your children as a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. And he wept over Jerusalem. There's something very, very special about that city, and it's where God chose to have his name dwell. Number 24. During Rehoboam's reign, what characterized the Jewish people? Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy more than all that their fathers had done. What do you think it means that they provoked him to jealousy? What does that mean? Exactly. So think of a guy and a girl, and they're dating, and they're getting pretty serious, and they like to sit together and talk. And then one time, the guy doesn't think that the girl is watching, but he's over with some other girl, talking pretty intently. And what's the response of his real girl? Well, she doesn't like that. Hey, I thought you were mine. Well, God is a jealous God. Not in a bad sense, not in a petty sense, but in the sense that he alone deserves our worship. He alone deserves our love and our loyalty and our obedience. And if we are dividing our loyalty between God and some other Chemosh or Moloch or Ashtoreth, God is sick about that. And it's supposed to cause us to say, well, I don't want to do that to God. I don't want to provoke him to jealousy. I don't want him to say that about me, that I'm provoking him to jealousy. But that is what Israel was doing. In the middle of that sentence, provoked them to jealousy more than all that their fathers had done. They built high places and pillars and asherim. So there's a variety of ways of worshiping idols. And a high place is kind of a shrine, and they were originally built just on hilltops. And it was usually associated with a god of the hill, or sometimes a god of the sky, because you were higher up. So that's a high place. Later on, that term high place is used not just of shrines on tops of hills, but you could actually build a high place on a plain too. So it's a shrine. A pillar is a sacred object, and it's like think of the Native Americans of the Northwest, totem pole. So this is a pole. It's usually wood, it could be stone, and it's often carved symbolically to represent a god or goddess. And the last one, the asherim, is again a cultic sacred object, a female goddess. This is another form of that same Ashtoreth or Ishtar, and it's a pole carved in the form of a female. And you would offer blood sacrifices or wine or various animals sacrificed to it. And who is it that's doing this now? In this question number 24, who is making all these things? The Jewish people. The Jewish people. I thought they were, don't they belong to Jehovah? Aren't they Yahweh's people? What are they doing? Well, they're copying all the nations around them. They're being like all those foreign tribes that they weren't supposed to get close to. And so all these nations' idols become the Jewish idols now. It gets worse. There were male cult prostitutes. Sexual behavior was a part of ritual worship. Can you believe it? I mean, how depraved can you get? And they did according to the nation's abominations. What's an abomination? It's so bad. It's just so bad. Think dirty diaper bad. Yeah, that bad. It's just absolutely repulsive. And God looks at this and he says, I think I'm going to be sick when he sees this anywhere in the world, but especially his own people. Number 25, on a scale of badness, how bad was their behavior out of verse 22? More than all their fathers had done. So you go back in time and you think back, David, before him was Saul, before him was the Judges. Remember the book of Judges? There's some pretty awful stuff in Judges. I mean, eek. You go back and before then, and you go into the period of the Exodus. What was Israel like in the wilderness? Groaning, grumbling, mumbling, complaining. Nothing is ever good enough for them. Oh, we're so thirsty. Where's the water? Oh, we're so hungry. We wish we had the meat that we had back in Egypt. Oh, why don't we go back to Egypt? And God has just miraculously brought them out of Egypt and provided everything they need. And now God is saying about Israel, you guys are worse than your ancestors. You guys are so spleeny. You guys are so mumbly. You are so wicked. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. Number 26, according to what standard did they behave? according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord dispossessed before Israel. So they are now acting like or worse than all these pagan tribes around them. And Israel is supposed to be a pure people, devoted, dedicated to Jehovah alone. Their behavior is just like or maybe worse than all these pagans all around them. Number 27, notice in 14:26 that Shishak took away the splendid gold shields that were in the king's palace out of 1 Kings 10. In fact, let's look at that for a moment. 1 Kings chapter 10. This is kind of interesting. 1 Kings 10, and we're going to look at verse 14. Now the weight of gold which came into Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. I believe a talent is 75 pounds. And so that's a lot of gold. Besides that, from the traders and the wares of the merchants and all the kings of the Arabs and the governors of the country, King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold, using 600 shekels of gold on each large shield. He made 300 shields of beaten gold, using 3 minas of gold on each shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with refined gold. There were 6 steps up to the throne, and a round top to the throne at its rear, and arms on each side of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside the arms. 12 lions were standing there on the 6 steps on the one side and on the other. Nothing like it was made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon, that's the name for his palace, were of pure gold. None was of silver. It was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon. Did you catch that? There is so much silver available, you treat it like whatever. Because gold is everything that he's got is gold. Solid gold flatware, solid gold drinking cups. Everything that he owns is gold. 22, for the king had at sea the ships of Tarshish with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years the ships of Tarshish came bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. Some other time we'll talk more about that. That's really fascinating. Solomon was the master of a network of trade routes that may have gone as far as India. That may be some of what's being talked about here. So King Solomon became greater than all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. All the earth was seeking the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. They brought every man his gift, articles of silver and gold, garments, weapons, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. Solomon is one of the richest men that ever lived. Maybe richer than Bill Gates. Maybe richer than Elon Musk. He might be, we don't know, but he is wealthy beyond compare. And as decoration, he has these gold shields made. And there's bunches of them. So the question we're number 27. How wealthy was Solomon? Well, he's unbelievably wealthy. How many gold shields did he have made? 500 total. And how much do the large ones weigh? 600 shekels, 15 pounds each. And how much do the small ones weigh? 3 minas or 5 pounds each. So Solomon had all these gold shields. They're part of his decor in his palace. The palace has the official name, the House of the Forest of Lebanon, because he had cedar logs imported from the mountains of Lebanon, and they're pillars in his throne room. And they're beautiful. They're kind of a reddish, a deep brown red color, and they're stunning. And his palace is like, a Middle Ages corollary would be the Palace of Versailles in France. It is just unbelievable. And on the walls, he has 500 solid gold shields hanging there just because he can. So now, we're on question number 31, back in 1 Kings 14. What did Rehoboam do to replace the lost gold shields? Because the king of Egypt walked in and said, hey, you've got some cash around here. I like those gold shields. They're gonna match my palace really nice. And he took them all. And now this is kind of the kicker here. Question number 31. What did he use to replace the lost gold shields? They're made shields of bronze. Bronze. So if gold is here and silver is here, bronze is on the floor in value. Bronze is very common. It's not a precious metal at all. It's a utilitarian metal. But no doubt he had somebody polish them really, really nice, scour them up, and they really shine. But then in this narrative, he says, maybe it's a little too much to have them hanging all the time. So we'll store them in the closet unless I'm on my way to the temple to worship. And then I'll have the guys put them out for me. Can you see something going on? So, Rehoboam is presiding over a second-rate, declining kingdom. From gold to bronze, from 12 tribes to 2, from a glorious kingdom under his grandfather and father to something that's kind of, well, we used to have gold shields. Now we use bronze.
So take it the king of Egypt had quite a force that he would walk in.
Yep. And that too is a sign of decline. Because under Solomon and under David, they were the movers and shakers. They had control of the whole territory. David repelled huge armies. Solomon had massive fortifications. But now Shishak is able to come in, and he didn't destroy Jerusalem, but he threatened to. And so Shishak says, I'll let you go if you let me come in and I pick out what I want. And Rehoboam has to say yes. So now, in a very short period of time, Israel has gone from being the glory of God to a second-rate podunk. And we're supposed to see some connections here. Number 33, the reader of this narrative is assumed to be able to make the connection between verses 22 and 24 and verses 25 and 28 of chapter 14. What is the connection? Disobedience, failure to be loyal to Jehovah, results in decline and loss of value and spiraling down. Defeat, they're defeated, their kingdom has shrunk by a factor of 15 or so, and small potatoes now. So what spiritual applications can you make from the life of Rehoboam? Worship God alone, be loyal to Jehovah and nothing else, and God will take care of you. Now, in the ancient days of Israel, there were physical blessings of prosperity that God guaranteed. We don't have those today. God does not say, if you worship me, everybody gets, $1,000 check a week. God doesn't say that. But he does say, I'll meet your needs. I'll take care of you. You're going to be okay. And so, worship God alone. What else? Yep. And what else, Jason? Yep. Yep. So getting back to that initial decision about getting advice from the elders and from the young men, who you listen to matters. who you get advice from, whose authority you hang on to, that is kind of important. And that would lead to another item. We need godly wisdom. Rehoboam lacked wisdom. He couldn't see what was happening. If he had been able to see, now is the time to win the people's hearts. Now is the time to show kindness and love and generosity and softness. Later on, if I need work done, I'll be able to say, hey guys, I treated you really nice for 10 years. How about if you help me out with some projects? But going into this, he lacked wisdom. He could have, as Jason says, he could have gotten wisdom by listening to the elders, but he wouldn't. And so we need godly wisdom. Pastor Nate.
I find it interesting, just because you have a wise parent does
Yeah.
not necessarily
Translated to a wise kid.
translate into a wise child.
Yeah.
And whether that was lack of instruction by the parent or lack of learning to learn from the child,
Yep.
I mean, all I had to do is read Proverbs.
Yeah, right. Read what his dad had written, and he would know better. Any other comments? Yeah. So, some Bible characters we enjoy studying. Some Bible characters start out on kind of a bad footing, and then we see they change. God gets a hold of their heart, they repent, they get straightened out, and their ending is pretty neat. Others we enjoy, they're steady. They just kind of stick with it. And then there are other Bible characters that we learn by negative example. And we read about them and say, Lord, help me not to be like that. And Rehoboam is one of those. We learn by the negativity of his life that ended poorly. So don't be like Rehoboam. Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes too, as we get older, we get wiser. It seems like as they get older, they decline in wisdom.
Many times. And I'm not sure if that's a result of, like, Solomon's choices to have all these foreign women. And it does say they turned his heart away. So we know that's the case with Solomon. And in other cases, why do kings of Israel that started out well end up going sideways when they get older? I don't know, but I know it's possible. And of course, that's a warning to all of us. Because you're walking with the Lord now, that does not guarantee that in 10 years you're going to still be with the Lord. We need his grace every day. Amen. Anybody else? Take your prayer bulletins, please. Let me